and welcome to the FEZ show. My name is Jack Giordmaina, and we had two fascinating races in Diriyah this weekend to kick off the season. The first race was won by Nick de Vries, and the second was won by Eduardo Mortara. Joining me to dissect the action from the opening two races of the season is the one and only Jack Pickering, and making his FEZ debut is Joshua Burch. How you doing, boys?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, standing in the shoes for Ed Hunter, who doesn't do Saudi Arabia. But hopefully this is the first of many I can do with you, both as well. And it is a fantastic race to join because it was a race, both of them. One was very exciting, which was a race of two halves. The second one ended on a whimper. We've got plenty to talk about, though, in two very different rounds in Diriyah.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, as you can kind of tell by the background, wasn't able to head out to Diriyah, unfortunately, and bring you all the content that we really wanted to give you on FEZ for the first round. However, they were two fantastic races, and we've still got 14 more to go after this, and I'm just hungry for more. I want more and more Formula E now.
I must admit, it did whet my appetite. Although, Pico, you could have 3D graphic, the green screen, got a desert behind you, just to make out that you did go. But unfortunately, yeah, things happened, and it didn't happen. But fingers crossed that we'll have Mr. Pickering out there for Mexico in 2 weeks' time, where he might be joining us from an FEZ show in a sombrero. And if he's not, I'll be quite disappointed. But anyway, the first talking point, Josh, I suppose that we'll talk about is, I want to talk about the end of race 2. We saw Alexander Sims, he had that crash, and we saw this crane come out on the track, and social media was quite vocal, and the drivers have been quite vocal about how that came about, and maybe that the race should have been red flagged in order for that crane to have come onto the track and then clear Alexander Sims's car. I just want to get your thoughts on that situation that we saw at the end of race 2.
Absolutely. I can understand the frustration of the fans on social media. I was commentating on the race, and I even said as well, as soon as I saw the car, I looked at the clock and saw we only had 10 minutes to go. My mind flashed back to Sanya a couple of years ago when we had a similar situation. I thought, okay, they're going to red flag the race, and then we'll have a restart plus the added time we had under the safety car. That never happened. And I thought it was a very dangerous, a very silly thing for the FIA to do as well. We know that we've had issues before in Saudi Arabia with cranes on the track. One time, the race went back to green when I think Nick Cassidy's Envision Virgin Racing was still on the circuit, and the crane was dangling the car, and Scott Elkins came on quicker than anybody saying free drinks at a bar, going full course yellow in 5, 4, 3. And it was ridiculous. I mean, it was so mishandled. The crane was stuck at the course for 3 laps. It was hanging the car at the same height as the halo was. Several cars nearly made contact as well with the flying Sims car. And the strangest thing of all, though, is the fact that the safety car suddenly stopped because there was a man walking in front of the tractor, and then the tractor was behind going very slow. The safety car came out, didn't know it was there, slammed on the brakes. The entire field concertinaed, and it ended with Oliver Askew having a winglet off on the front of the car. That could have been an aerial accident if anybody wasn't paying attention. It was stupid. The race should have been red flagged, restarted with 9 minutes to go, and nobody would have had a problem with that at all. We've had it before in Sanya. I think once again, it's seen that the FIA is a little bit they don't know their own rules half the time.
Yeah, Pico, I agree with what Josh said. It was very silly. Like, I want to get your view on, when when all the cars had stopped and they looked like they'd been obviously damaged with Askew's car, and I remember when the picture just stopped and everyone stopped and were like, what's happened? Thinking that there's been a separate crash, and then the helicopter panned out and we're like, oh, they're just stuck. Just the views, when you saw the car being hanged and everyone driving underneath it, did you go, this is just not right?
Well, the joys of live tweeting the event. I was looking down at my phone, and then looked up when my dad had noticed what had happened. But yeah, I'm completely on the same wavelength as Josh. That should have been a red flag, and then we should have restarted it. However, I am very happy with how they did after that bit, instead of going to have one lap to decide all. I think we've kind of had enough of that in motorsport over the last couple of months. So we need that to die down a little bit before we do something similar. But yeah, so I think that they handled it well, because there was a huge amount of people saying that, oh, you should have gone back to green so we could have had more racing. That isn't a way to finish the race. It isn't the best way to finish the race, but it happens. But yeah, red flag would have been the way to go, but I'm happy that they didn't send it back to green, because yeah, we've had enough of that.
I'm going to disagree with you there, Pico, and I'm going to come back. Right, I'll throw to Josh first, and then I'll give you a chance to respond in a second. Because, Josh, we saw in race 1 that we had the additional time, which was 10 minutes. It was 5 minutes 15 seconds. It was 10 minutes that we got in practice. There was 5 minutes 15 seconds. And yes, we know that there's this rule that in the final 5 minutes of the race, the additional time will not be added. So even though the safety car started on the 9th minute mark, the safety car period was long enough to get into the 5th minute, which meant no additional time was carried on after that safety car period. Therefore, I think because we've got this rule of additional time, for me, it kind of stops the ending that we had. We could have had some additional time, potentially, because the drivers had enough energy. If we looked at the usable energy, it was at 30%. They were saying it's going to be a flat-out race. So I was like, should that rule of additional time be looked at? Maybe not in the final 5 minutes to have a full, 45 seconds, but if there is you added that extra lap, or you add the 2 laps, depending on however you want to make that rule. So we've got that additional time, and races don't finish on, a dull moment like it did yesterday under safety car, and we do go green, and we do get the fight that we wanted to see before that safety car happened.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. We should have had the end of the race with the added time. You knew the rule about the added time not being allowed after 5 minutes. I was commentating on it. I didn't know it. There was zero information from race control stating that there will be no added time to this race. The only information we got was when they crossed the line and the final lap message came up. But that still left us confused, because all of a sudden we had the safety car in this lap and we had Mortara driving to the line. We could have got some racing because the track was clear for the final lap on the scheduled time. So it was very mishandled. Mortara came to the line. I didn't know if we were going to see a checkered flag or a green flag, and that is not right. They confused the fans. They confused us in the box. I've got 7 monitors up here in the commentary box in my position for calling the race. I can see every live timing page. I had the driver radio on. I can see the TV pictures, and I had no idea what was going on. That is not good for Formula E trying to grow the sport at all. I do agree they should look at adding the time on at the end of the race. We had the precedent from the day before, 5 minutes and 15 seconds being added on. However, I don't think that's working. It was very confusing when they added the time back. I couldn't tell they'd done it to begin with. I had to have Ed tell me on the YouTube chat, because he got away with watching the race on my watch-alongs. But also, I think we should look at what you said. Instead of adding time on, add laps on at the end of the race. We know it's a 45-minute race plus 1 lap. Just add a couple more laps on, add 2 or 3 laps. Let the 45 minutes go and then put laps on the end, because that way the teams know exactly how much percentage you will use on each lap. It just makes it more simpler, because we had a situation in race 1 where they had to do an extra 2 laps because De Vries crossed the line with 4 seconds to go. So it just makes it more sense if you add laps on instead of times.
Interesting thought, which it's quite hilarious, because I had a lot of people message me that it's becoming a little bit like football with the stoppage time. Like, you let the time go fast, and then you know someone comes out and says, well, race control come out and say you've got 3 minutes of additional or laps that you've got to do. Pico, you were sort of wanting the race. You were happy with the race finishing under the safety car. Do you think that additional time rule could be looked at in that final 5 minutes, or are you happy with it?
Right, when you say that I was happy with it finish under the safety car, I was happy that they stuck to the rules, which hasn't been a thing in other forms of motorsport. But we'll end the comparisons there. Yeah, so I was happy that they stuck to the rules. That was my main thing that I was happy with. Yes, I would have loved to seen a couple more laps. So the reason why, well, people watching this won't know, but you two, I was doing some things on the other screen just before we came on air. I was working out how much time would have progressed for everything happening. So I know that 2 minutes 15 would have been added up to the 5 minute mark of safety car, and Mortara would have then crossed the line with 15 seconds to go. So there would have been 2 laps, but we didn't. But taking into account Mortara might have probably backed off a bit to make sure that there was one more lap, because Mortara went flat out to the line at the end of the race yesterday. So yeah, we probably would have got just one more lap of racing anyways with the additional time. But yeah, I think that is something that they're going to work on. I think Formula E have been relatively good at tweaking the rules here and there. Obviously, after the Valencia fiasco, they changed the deduction of energy thing to better suit the cars and the racing. And so I think they'll take a look at this. They'll probably not implement it for Mexico, but there's a 2-month gap between Mexico and Rome, and that'll be when they'll evaluate some other things, and then they'll head to Rome. We'll have some tweaks here and there, and then everyone will be a little bit more in the clear, I think.
I just think for a fan who's watching a motor race, I think every time, if you look at any form of motorsport, every time you finish under a caution, it's kind of like, oh, I spent all this time watching this race and it's finished under caution. And I just think that the additional time that Formula E is actually one of the smartest ideas that they've potentially come up with, where you don't have to end a race under in a caution period. Effectively, you don't have to. So you've always got a chance to finish a race under green, which I think any fan wants, because, you know, yes, Mortara was leading at the 9-minute mark, but if we had a normal race, there's no reason to suggest that he would have finished the race first. So at least you get that extra lap and extra fighting, so, you know, he didn't just have a breeze last 9 minutes. But let's talk into something a bit more positive in terms of qualifying, Josh. Now, we had 2 pretty consistent qualifying groups where, you know, the fastest cars, let's say Mercedes, we sort of knew going into this season, because Mercedes was the quickest car last season, but with the qualifying format that we had, it was hard to prove who was the fastest. But we saw Venturi and we saw Mercedes, with that Mercedes, obviously both cars running the same powertrain, be towards the front in both qualifying sessions. So I just want to thought, how did you find the qualifying sessions this weekend?
Well, on paper, extremely difficult to follow. This is my notes I have in the commentary box, which I had to make a week before, and it shows you the Group A, Group B, as quarterfinals, semi-finals, finals, and I find it incredibly difficult to follow on paper. And I put a tweet out as well the week before saying this isn't great on paper. It's confusing to the fans. Let's see if it's any better on television. And it's a million times better on television. It's such a better format than the group stages that we had, because obviously we can't run what Formula One do, which is 3 stages where all the cars out on the track and then we reduce them by 5, because it's a street course and some of the courses we go to are incredibly small. The best we can do is the group stages going into this quarterfinal, semi-final, final. I thought it worked really well. I thoroughly enjoyed it. As well, the spectacle could be a little bit different. It's the first weekend we've tried it. The TV pictures could have been a little bit different as well. I don't like the idea of shrinking down the times, because to see the 2 laps together like they tried, so that they can sync them up, because I was watching on the timing monitor. I knew he was on pole before the TV pictures had finished. So I think if they put it side by side, but with live cameras, that works incredibly better. It builds up the tension as well. And I enjoyed it. I mean, Van Dorn did it really well in race 1, getting pole position in those 3 points. But I think it worked best of all in race 2. De Vries, 107.154. Mortara, 107.159. 5 thousandths of a second between them. One of the closest pole margins in Formula E history. That is absolutely fantastic. But the only error with it was the Da Costa de Grassi in Gil B that everybody got confused about. I think, though, that was the complete fault of Da Costa. I'm sure you'll talk about that more.
Yeah, obviously Da Costa Pico making that error there. It was quite hilarious when he had that interview when he said, you know, or I must be blind because, you know, I went when I was supposed to go. And then the TV pictures clearly showed you missed it, so you must have been blind because yeah, the green light went to Costa and you missed it.
I mean, I'm not sure how he can miss that. It was on for a full 5 seconds. Now, usually you don't think 5 seconds is that long, but but watching it for me, 5 seconds felt like an eternity. Because you were sat there watching it, and I don't know what the Costa must be doing, whether he was having a look around or he was just down fiddling stuff on his wheel. But even if he's looking at stuff on his wheel, it must be in his peripheral vision, because drivers have great, because they need to make decisions at 180 miles an hour, some of them, and so yeah, I think yeah, it was I mean, like, it was silly from Da Costa, but I mean, like, it happens, and obviously from that it delayed the entire session a huge amount. But yeah, I mean, I think it was absolutely fantastic to watch. I did have an advantage because I saw what it was like in Valencia, and so I knew more than most coming into this weekend in Diriyah, but it played out absolutely perfectly. It didn't feel too long. There was just that really long gap between the duels where Da Costa and Di Grassi messed up. But yeah, with the exception of that, I think it's absolutely fantastic.
Josh, I just want to add on quickly. What do you make? Because for me, watching it was my first time watching it as well, and obviously we had the two groups there of 12 minutes, and I just felt for me. Now, there was a conversation about this in testing, which Pico will allude to, and I'll let him talk about that in a second. But for me, the 12-minute sessions just felt a tad bit too long, because I just felt like we were waiting for that crescendo, right? Of the last minute, especially when we saw, when it was Group A, when everyone started going faster in that last minute. But I just felt the build up to that in that 12-minute session was just a bit too long. Maybe the session could be a bit shorter. What are your views on that?
I completely agree with you. They've got this rule where every driver has to set a lap time in the first 6 minutes, and after 6 minutes, they all head back to the pits. Some of them changed tires and went back out again. I mean, it just felt a bit too long. It's 24 minutes plus a gap in between, so it's about half hour of qualifying, and then you've got another 45 minutes of the duels. I mean, it's too long to sit there making the qualifying format. The entire format needs to be shrunk down. And before Mexico, I would put it as 8 minutes for Group A. Group B, that takes it down to just 14 minutes for the two. Halves the time, gets a fantastic amount of energy packed into it as well. Then you can have the charging of the cars ready for the duels. But I think, what was it? You referred to it as well, Pico, because it was 10 minutes between the end of semi-final 2 and the start of the final. That's a long time to sit around doing nothing. The format works, the timings just don't.
Yeah, that's 8 minutes. Hilariously, was exactly the thing I was going to pitch to Pico, because I felt, you know what, these tracks are quite short. However, we do have a long track in Rome where maybe 8 minutes might be a bit touch and go. But, what I was thinking, if we go back to Paris with this format, 12 minutes in a sub 1 minute track, which, most Formula E tracks are just like Diriyah, just over the 1 minute mark. 12 minutes just felt quite long, and it was quite repetitive until we got to the end. So, Pico, I know you know some information on what the drivers said about this, so I'm going to let you come in now and sort of explain a bit more.
So yes, when this idea first came around, it was a 10-minute session. It was supposed to just be a 10-minute session, and then we did the trial in Valencia, and most of the and a lot of the drivers, including Robin Freins, he said that 10-minute period was too short to come in and do the pit stop and everything, and then go out and then go out again and do the final few runs. So yeah, admittedly Valencia, that was what, a 1 minute 27 lap, I think, when we went there last year. So it kind of makes sense. But yes, I completely agree. I think we do have to see it in places like Rome, but for most of these places, we are only just over the 1 minute mark. We're never anywhere more than 120, with the exception of Rome, to be honest. So but yeah, I think this is going to be something that evolves, and then yeah. But I'm very happy with this format. It's definitely here to stay. But yeah, I reckon that there will be some tweaks here and there still to come.
Because I remember texting you in after. I was like, "This has been going on for over an hour. Like, we're still not done." I'm like, "When am I going to be finished? I've got to do the report. All of a sudden, the race is going to be starting in like 10 minutes if we carry on at this rate." But I do agree, though, it is 100 times better than the format that we had before. And obviously, there's always going to be tweaks, and nothing's perfect first time. I don't even think the Formula One qualifying system as it was probably perfect the first time they used it. They might have, they've adjusted the minutes since then, from when it first came out. So not everything's perfect straight away, but so much better. And I think we'll get a more consistent championship from it, Josh, because we saw the first the Mercedes get to the top. We saw it was still quite a close qualifying, so I don't think we're going to get that randomness in qualifying, which creates those random mixed grid races that we'll see. And maybe we might start to form a pecking order in Formula E, which is really hard to say because all the cars are pretty much identical to last year's cars, and the field have concertinaed up and it's so close. But we might soon start getting some form of pecking order.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right, because we saw Vries and Mortara in the final of the second time we tried it, and they were winners in race 1 and race 2. And Mortara and de Grassi sort of played the team game there in the second race, but it proved it works. And I think we're not going to have the likes of a Neo suddenly in Superpole. That's not going to happen. They're too far back. They're going to get eliminated quite quickly. We saw, would it really have been fair for Giovinazzi to have made it through to the quarterfinals when he himself has admitted, I'm not really up to speed yet. I'm not there yet. I'm going to need a while to get used to these cars. I've still got Formula One in me. So I like this system. It rewards the drivers who can actually race well, have got a good car setup, and it doesn't put it too much down to random. Instead of having to do one flying lap to get through to Superpole, you've got to do 4 consistent laps. It's brilliant.
Indeed. So I want to talk about race 2 quickly, because in race 1, Pico, the Mercs, they sort of dominated, right? If it wasn't for Van Dorn probably would have won that race if he didn't miss the attack mode, which allowed the Vries to slip in and get that, 1-2 from Mercedes. It was a dream start. And they dominated, and we were going into race 2 thinking, here we go again, because the qualifying system was quite consistent with thinking Mercedes are going to be up there again, although Van Dorn wasn't able to, but De Vries was. But then we got the Venturis during that race who managed to get into that 1-2 position and had about a 1.5 second gap over the Vries and Robin Freins. And then all of a sudden, as that race emerged, the pace just kind of slowed. Whereas Mercedes in race 1 sort of, kept that pace and dominated it and were never in trouble. The Venturis sort of put themselves into trouble by slowing down, and all of a sudden Verd in P5 and everybody else, Lotterer, was catching back up. Why do you think they slowed down so significantly?
I think it's an interesting one. I think the fact that we did have the 2 Venturis at the front and they were playing the team game, I think that was a huge part of it. So, I mean, kudos to Venturi. They do now lead the Constructors' Championship by a single point. And yeah, I think they played the game absolutely perfectly. It was very, very exciting, that second race. But yeah, what really surprised me, because obviously the way that everyone got past De Vries was everyone got through, went through attack mode and got past him that way, and then he started falling back. But then he took his attack mode, and I was fully expecting, he's going to be back up to the front in 4 laps time. And every time he came back round, he seemed to be about 9/10 or a second off the car in front. And there was no way, even with 30 additional kilowatts of power, that he was going to make up that gap over the course of that straight. And so he kind of settled into 4th. Then when he ran out of attack mode, Vern came and slightly ambitious move down into turn 18, which sent, because everyone was like Constantina together, it meant that De Vries lost about 5 places in the space of like 5 corners or something.
Yeah, it was odd. Josh, what do you think of De Vries' strategy there? Because obviously he was undercut by the Venturis with the use of attack mode. And then people were expecting him, well, he's got to go at some point. And he went on the 18th minute mark. So on the 18th minute mark of that race, so technically in the final 9 minutes of that race in race 2, he takes his attack mode then, but doesn't really has that effect. Like, what did you think of the Freezer strategy? Did you expect him to take attack mode earlier, or did you agree with him going late so he had that power to potentially just breeze past the others?
I think he fell into the trap of what the other teams had done brilliantly. The two Venturis did as well. They took their both attack modes in the first 15 minutes of the race as well. They got that out of the way and they were able to settle down into a rhythm. De Vries, I think, lost out. He was too much in his mindset of, well, I won this race yesterday. I know exactly how I can get back to the front, exactly how I can control it. What happened yesterday is going to work today. I think Mercedes miscalculated the fact that it's two different races. We always see whenever we had double headers, race 2 is a million times different. De Vries led 14 laps, got passed by Degrassi, and then Degrassi let Mortara through. Degrassi was always playing the team game. Mercedes stood no chance, and especially with Robin Frijns in the Envision, sort of the fly in the ointment, as Ed put it as well. He was stuck in between the two, and they were sort of all backing each other up. Mortara and Degrassi were regenerating energy. That let Frijns to go forward as well, and that held up De Vries. So every time De Vries was going to go for a lunge, Frijns was going on the attack of Degrassi. So there was no real opportunity for him to get through. That allowed the back four of Vern, Verline, and Lotta as well to all come through to the forward as well. So we had a 9-way fight for the lead of the race effectively, because it was beginning to be one long train. De Vries just got completely meddled up with it as well. I think Mercedes will learn from that and they'll start taking their attack modes earlier on in the race. We know what they're going to be like now. It was the same as race 1. They just made an error there. They thought they could be more dominant than they could be.
And then to sort of wrap up the show then, let's talk about the people that stood out to you. So I'm going to come to Pico first. In terms of a driver or a team, in that first race, who stood out?
This is really like putting me on the spot, but I've got a few names in my head, and they are going to be different from what people think. I'm going to say 2 names. I'm going to say one is Lucas Di Grassi, because he's a brand new team, and because all the technology has been carried over from season 7 to season 8, you would have thought that Di Grassi would be at a bit of a disadvantage compared to everyone else who was stayed at the same team and got the same technology from season to season. So, I mean, Di Grassi was fantastic over both days. The other person that I want to say a huge well done to, because I've really underestimated him, was Andre Lotterer, who got it into the duels on both. I almost said Super Pole. Jesus Christ! Like, I'm going back to season 7 there. He got into the duels on both days, and yes, he fell through the pack on the Friday race. However, on the Saturday race, he scored P4, and he consistently beat Verline across the weekend. And so, yeah, I mean, I do tip my hat to Andre. That was a great weekend for him.
I have to agree. Andre Lotterer did have an absolutely great weekend. Joshua, what do you think? Who stood out for you?
I completely agree with you. Andre Lotterer, I was going to say it as well. I think you saw me nodding like that as well, like a Chinese cat. But honestly, Lotterer in race 1 impressed me in terms of he got into the dual system. He started 3rd on the grid, and then it was a mismanagement of energy. Safety car caught him out, dropped further back, and it was a real disappointment. Race 2, came back more determined, more focused. It was fantastic to see him battling up there as well. Could have been a podium, but the Venturis were just out there. I think my surprise team is definitely Venturi. They've stepped up so much this year as well. They've got the Mercedes powertrain. Jerome D'Ambrosio, his first weekend as team principal as well. He was a cool, calm head. Not bad for a DJ, of course, because he retired from racing to become a music DJ. Now he's come back. Susie Wolf was there this weekend. She's now taken over as executive CEO as well. Just a fantastic team they've got there as well. And with Mercedes leaving at the end of this year, I would highly put Venturi as the next top team. Nissan have dropped off. Audi have quit. Porsche aren't there yet. Watch out for Venturi. I think that's going to make Leonardo DiCaprio very, very happy.
Indeed. I'll say Oliver Askew then, boys, because obviously I think he deserved a bit of praise. I'm glad that you didn't say him. I must admit, I'm glad that you didn't say him, because I tell you what, those were worthy mentions. But obviously Oliver Askew for his debut, I thought was solid, right, and developed quite quickly. So before we end, we touched there very quickly on Nissan, and knowing that this season Pico is kind of like a throwaway season. It's the season before the next, like in Formula 1 last season, it's the season before the big regulation change as we go into Gen 3 for next season. So do you think for teams like Mahindra, potentially, Nissan, Dragon, Neo and that lot, do they just bin this season off? This is our car. We're not going to really touch the software. And we're going to put all our energy into Gen 3 and make sure that we're ready going into Gen 3.
No, I don't think they should, especially in Mahindra's case, because they took the first 2 practice sessions of the season. Roland's clearly got pace. Sims was on the edge of the points in both races until he crashed out in the second one. I think they have got a solid effort. They could do well. They are. I've forgotten whether it was Jack or Dario's pick for Dark Horse of the Year, but it was definitely one of them. So yeah, for Mahindra, definitely not. Nissan, I feel that they are going to be a bit behind. They are. Did they get points with Gunter in race 1?
I think it was P7.
I want to say that they. I think he finished P7, but don't quote me on that. So yeah, I think that Nissan. I don't really want to see anyone just like fall back to take advantage for next year. Obviously, they're working on Gen 3 in the background, but yeah, I just want to see them all go. Well, they're not going to go all out, but yeah.
Do you expect anyone, Joshua, to do a Haas F1, not update their car, and just focus fully on Gen 3 for next season?
I think Dragon are going to mainly focus on Gen 3, although they showed a few flashes of pace for Sete Camera. I think Nissan are mainly going to try and get to midway point of the season and then say, nah, we're not going to have any of it. Shocking weekend for Boemi as well. I wouldn't expect Boemi to start focusing on Formula E this season. I think he'll look more to World Endurance Championship for 2022. Personally as well, I've got a feeling Mercedes might start dropping off towards the end of it as well, because they're not looking forward to Gen 3, so they've got nothing to lose at all, so they'll start dropping off the cliff. I think we're going to see Venturi push to the end as well. Porsche are going to push to the end, but watch out as well for the backfielders, because they're going to just drop off and start becoming issues, especially I think Nissan, Dragon, as I said, they're going to start becoming big issues.
So it'll be interesting to see how this season pans out effectively. Boys, thank you so much for being on the show. I've really enjoyed it.
Cheers, Jack.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
It has indeed, hasn't it? So that's it. So we'll be back probably in either for a pre-race show before Pico potentially jets off to Mexico to maybe see if there's any news stories, any interesting things that we could do before a show. If not, then we'll catch you in 2 weeks' time for the Mexican E-Prix review, where if Pico is not wearing a sombrero, we're going to be very sad. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.